My hands are like ice. Oh, it's that cold. How are we doing all the time? Hello, I'm Dougie Irvin. I'm the director of Gaspard's Foxtrot, and we've made this short film to help you see some of the things that went behind the scenes while we're making the concert film experience. Hope you enjoy it.
We're in the Royal Scottish National Orchestra's headquarters in Glasgow, and this morning we started work on Gaspard's Foxtrot. It was the first time the orchestra had performed together for a very long time, and the first time I had heard the music played live. It's been a couple of years in the making, from first talking to Jonathan Dove about the project and then the creative process, and then COVID has delayed everything repeatedly. So there was this tremendous feeling of excitement, which was then kind of put off, and then finally having to do it.
Curled up in the sun was Gaspard the fox.
And it feels quite magical. This story, inspired by a real little fox, is here on a stage in Glasgow.
A cat appeared on the garden wall.
I love the way that Jonathan has given each of the main characters their own signature instrument in exactly the same way as Peter and the Wolf. And this is a great way for music teachers and for parents to get children to listen out for those particular instruments and hear how the layering of instruments creates orchestral texture.
Gaspard was friends with Honey's dog, Finty.
My name is Davor Juel Magnussen and I play principal trombone in the RSNO. In Gaspard's Foxtrot, the trombones play the character Finty, the dog. It's not like we're running around acting like dogs or barking out loud or anything like that, but we have a little musical structure that kind of sounds like a gentle, friendly little sort of bark. So it's kind of like Scooby-Doo.
I play the character of the fox, and the bassoon follows the piece throughout, giving different emotions and different feelings that Gaspard feels on his adventures through London town. It's got quite a wide variety of sound which you hear in this piece. It goes right from the bottom of the instrument to the top of the instrument. And the bottom of the instrument is quite boisterous, the top of the instrument is much sort of eerier sound and more a lean sound. If you think about the fox, it's quite a lean animal. Its movements will be quick, or equally it might just slink about. So I think the bassoon suits it really quite well.
When I wrote the first Gaspard book, I learned very quickly that I don't need to describe something if James can draw it. So I don't need to say the house was big, the door was blue, the steps were made of stone, because James can draw all of that.
I've done many pictures of Gaspard the Fox already for the other stories, but they always begin the same way, in a sketchbook. So when I first started illustrating the first book, I didn't really know how to draw foxes. So I did lots and lots and lots of drawings, not very good drawings, and I learned as I went along. I think the more you draw, the better you get. And I tried different pens and different pencils and different kinds of paint and ink, all sorts of experimenting. After doing all that, I decided the way I wanted to illustrate the book, and then I started planning the individual pages. So that's how I began Gaspard's Foxtrot. And this is the sketchbook that I used. And inside you can see these little pencil drawings. We call them thumbnail sketches, and they're a bit like storyboarding. And they show how I'm going to plan what I'm going to put on each page. The important thing to remember is that there are a lot of words to fit in, but you've got to also have space for the illustrations. But you're only allowed a certain number of pages. And so I have to think very carefully which pictures are going to go on which page. Because the story of Gaspard is about a journey, one of the most useful things for me was creating the big map showing Gaspard's journey across the city of London. And that was really useful for me because I could then imagine the journey and see all the places that Gaspard visits in the story. The other really important thing for me, because the story takes place at real locations, was visiting those places, visiting all the streets and buildings that Gaspard goes past in the story and sketching them. and taking photographs so that I had lots of reference.
We both loved performing with orchestras. James paints live and narrates with orchestras, and I narrate with orchestras. And we said at that very first lunch where we were talking about the first book, wouldn't it be incredible if one day one of our stories is set to music? I love Jonathan's music. He's one of our finest living composers, and we were delighted that he agreed to take the project on. For this book, I had to write in a way that also provided stimuli for Jonathan's composition. So there are lots of musical cues in it, such as the chimes of the clock of Fortnum and Mason's department store, Theatreland, and of course the roar of traffic through London. Some animal sounds as well, bees. I was amazed that Jonathan actually composed the sound of worms. That was a surprise for me. I hadn't expected him to include the last post when they go past the War Memorial. It seems quite obvious now, but when I first heard the music, I was overwhelmed by how rich Jonathan's score was. And now that we're working with visible fictions, it brings this fourth creative element. So there's the writing, the illustration, the composing, but also visual, digital artistry that they're bringing to bring the storybook to life with puppetry and animations. It's a four-way creative endeavor, and it's been the most creatively enriching process I've ever been on.
The thing that people might not realise about its release, is it too smoky?
It's a lot of smoke.
I can wait a second if you want. I might formulate a better answer in that case. My name is Connor Riley. I am a camera operator and an editor, and I was shooting the narration section of Gaspard's Foxtrot, and I will be doing the edit of the final piece.
My name is Grant Anderson, and I'm the lighting designer of Gaspard's Foxtrot.
Grant and Connor were brought into the team as soon as we practically could, because I knew they were going to be very important members of the creative vision of this.
So I've obviously got this incredible team. Jack Hunter, who does all of the orchestral filming, and his setup is amazing. So we were able to tap into that and share our resources between the two companies.
The concert was filmed with remote cameras, essentially, that are controlled remotely, robotically by Jack. We've got a clarinet coming up, he moves the robotic camera to the clarinets. So Laura will be like, clarinet next.
And coming up next will be clarinet.
Coming in 5.
Clarinets, go.
Clarinets. Right, cool. And then we've got timpanis. Right, timpanis coming up. We need to know the music really well to make sure that the camera's in the right place for all of those moments. And Jack is just an absolute wizard.
The project cuts and moves between 3 worlds. So there is the live concert element, then there's another aspect of it which is with Zeb, narrating the book, and then there's the animation section.
It was about locations and about mood and atmosphere. So, for example, if they're in a garden on a bright summer's day, how do we, when we cut to the orchestra, convey that to keep it visually interesting for the children? Or when we're on a London bus, what does that mean from a lighting point of view? Again, when we cut to the orchestra, for me, what it means is there kind of is a bit of red, because we know that kind of classic primary red colour of the London bus. And even when we're cutting to the narration scenes, just that there's a hint of that red, so that when you've got every location and every shot where we are chronologically within the story has got a similar aesthetic.
You're having cameras and lights around you, and you kind of block it out. Other people are dealing with the lights and the sounds and the cameras, and you just trust that they know what they do. It is a little bit hard, though, to ignore when you see a camera move towards you. That takes a bit of getting used to.
It's funny, there is a lot of different roles and roles you might not even know exist. I mean, when I showed up on the day, there was more people than I thought were going to be there. My bet on the day was making sure Zeb's stuff was, shot well, looked how I wanted it, and matched with Grant's lighting with the stuff in the room. And I just have to make sure that bit is taken care of.
The music is feeding into Zeb's ear so that he can then record his story tell without there being an actual orchestra present.
Doogie actually suggested having 2 cameras to shoot Zeb, so one directly in front of him and one to the side, kind of like the setup we've got here. When Zeb does a voice of a character, he moves and does the character here. It really worked.
One of the ideas behind the script that we've done in the adaptation is how those worlds start off very separate but then slowly start to come together and combine and mix.
The section where the animation crosses over into the video, Gaspard the fox in the story walks out on stage, and what we're trying to do here is having the fox walk out into the orchestra. It's really fun to shoot because it's just panning across the floor as an imaginary fox appears. It's quite fun. It was nice getting the conductor to interact with the fox. But then obviously we had to shoot reactions of the orchestra, because if a fox walked in, you can't ignore it. The orchestra has to notice that a cartoon fox has appeared. We had to identify a few orchestra members that might be up for it and then kind of force them into it. It's even more difficult as well, because not only are they performing on camera for the first time, like all of their friends are watching them, the whole orchestra's there looking. I think they did a pretty good job. I've watched the footage back and there's some really funny ones. It's just really good of them to get involved and, you know, be a bit silly.
Bringing together all the orchestra bits, all the narration bits, all the animation bits. Now we've collected all those parts and start to stitch it all together to make the actual final film.
There's 8 cameras there, plus the animation, plus the 2 cameras that I used to shoot Zeb. It's a lot of stuff to play with. It's tough, but it's also an amazing thing to have because there's so many options. On those big moments, you can cut to something really wide and see the whole orchestra, or you can cut really hard and close to like the timpani or, you know, the strings or whatever it is that's hitting that moment. And hopefully those 8 cameras, the animation and Zeb's piece are all just going to flow together and to the point where you don't even notice us cutting between them.
After that, the signer needs to also see it because Jamie's going to have to do an artistic response to that so that he can find a way to accurately sign the story tell of Zeb so that the deaf viewer will fully understand what's going on and how he's going to artistically interpret that. I hope people really enjoy the efforts of all these wonderful artists, these wonderful creatives. They've gone and really spent a lot of energy to try and make this the best that they can, and I hope people enjoy it.
Gaspard's Foxtrot is a special kind of piece because you have a very specific story and you get told the story along with the music, and the music is both sound effects but also tells the story. There's lots of other music out there which doesn't have words with it, but there's still a story behind it. Sometimes it's a specific story, but most of the time it's the story that you make up yourself in your head. If you find that happens a lot, you're probably very musical and you should definitely start playing music.